Have you got a tall, lanky plant that you know you need to prune but you're terrified you'll kill it? What about that big, bushy, overgrown Calathea that is starting to look a mess? No idea where to start?
Well, my plant friend, I've got your back because I'm going to show you everything you need to know to prune your plant like a pro.
From Monstera to Pothos to Calathea to snake plant, I've got all the plants covered, plus all the questions you've always asked yourself, like how, when and where to prune.
You'll be a plant pruning whisperer by the end of this video.
So, there's a bunch of reasons why you should prune your plant, but my favourite one is that it gets your little mister all fired up.
Cutting back the stems of a Tradescantia or thinning out the leaves of a peace lily encourages more vigorous growth, so you're actually doing it a favour.
In lots of plants, cutting a stem even results in 2 new growth points emerging, so it's a great hack to bush it out. The Jade plant is the perfect example of this.
So I've got with me here my larger Jade that I keep on my east-facing windowsill there, so it gets lots of light. But as you can see, he's a very handsome, bushy fellow, isn't he? And the reason for that is because I regularly prune him back. So as you can see with this Jade here, this stem here, there's a longer stem here, and I made a previous cut right there, and then it's produced 2 new stems. That always happens with a Jade, pretty much without fail. So if you were to go through this plant, you would always see where I made the cut there and then 2 new branches. So you can have no fear about cutting the stems back of the Jade plant, because they will always grow back. If you're not too happy with how something is growing, then you can always go back in and cut again. For example, here, I made a previous cut just down there, and it's produced this longer stem here and a shorter stem here. Not really sure why. My hunch is probably that this has got more light than this one. I'm not too happy with that, so I can go in and cut again. So all you want to do is just go in between 2 sets of leaves in the middle. Just a nice clean cut, like so. So with a Jade plant, these 2 leaves were just below where I made the cut on the stem. You'll get a branch growing here in this direction, the same direction as that leaf, and a branch here on this side as well, growing in the same direction as that leaf. So you just want to make sure that you've got nice clean pruners whenever you're making cuts on your plants.
Sometimes a plant is just looking like a lanky beanpole, and who wants that in their home? Cutting it back resets it to grow in a more compact shape. Anything that grows via a stem is perfect for cutting back in this way, and trust me, you're not going to kill it.
This plant here is the perfect example of the power of pruning and why you can't kill your plant by cutting it back. So this is a Philodendron verrucosum, a very nice plant, and it was a plant about that high, I think, something like that. Had a few leaves, maybe 4 sets of leaves on here, and I cut it right back near enough to the base right there, and it's now producing a new stem here and a new stem at the base of the plant as well. So the plant always wants to survive, always wants to carry on growing, so have no fear about cutting it back because it will always grow back. So I've got with me here my Philodendron melanocrisis. So called because the boy is always in crisis. I mean, look at the state of that leaf right there. I don't know what was trying to happen there. It's not unfurled or anything, but at least the latest leaf is in pretty good nick. But the main problem with this guy is that the space in between the leaf nodes, which are these marks on the stem where there's kind of these weird aerial roots sprouting out, is quite long. I don't think it should be that long on a melanochrysum. So that suggests that it's maybe suffering from a lack of light, potentially, even though it lives on my west-facing windowsill, although I did move it there relatively recently. It's only been living there a couple of months. So when you've got a plant like this, you can't just get your pruners out and snip it right back. So I like to leave probably at least 1 leaf for it to be able to photosynthesize. So you can, up to you where you make the cut really. But when you do make a cut, there's a little growth point there, a little oval green mark, and that's where the new stem will come from. So I could cut it there if I wanted to activate that node, but I still think that's a little bit too lanky. If a new stem was to grow there, it might be a little bit top heavy with this lanky stem piece down here. So I'm gonna go a little bit lower, and I might even go to the bottom leaf. So you just want to make a cut in between the leaf node. There's a leaf node there, and there's a leaf node here in between. Doesn't need to be too specific, and make the cut. So this plant will be able to photosynthesize, and there'll be a leaf a new bud on here somewhere for it to start growing. So a new stem will emerge. And then with these, you don't want to lob these in the bin. You can just cut, whoops, in between each leaf node, like so, and propagate. Pop that into some water, all these stems, roots will grow from here, and then you can pop them up, and you'll have more melanochrysums to be miserable about. The next plant on my chopping hit list is this Peperomia raindrop, which is a very nice plant. The leaves are absolutely gorgeous, and I think it's a much nice alternative to the Chinese money plant, the Pilea peperomoides. Probably get a lot of heat from you guys in the comments about that. But as you can see, looking a bit top heavy, a bit wavy, these stems. So they've got quite lanky and tall. And the problem with this plant is that it's losing leaves at the base. So it's got top heavy growth obviously at the top with lots of leaves, but at the base, there's no leaves left. But that shouldn't be a problem. I'm gonna cut it right back like so. Because even though there's no leaves on this branch that I've just lobbed off, it still has photosynthesizing potential, so it should activate a new, or hopefully a couple of new growth points lower down for it to branch out and be a nice bushy specimen. And this trunk down here will also thicken. Whenever you make a cut on a plant, like so, cut it right back, the trunk always thickens. So I'm gonna go through without any issues and trim back this bad boy. So you might be kind of shocked, or maybe even crying, sat on the sofa watching me do this, but it is the best thing for the plant. So there's an example there actually where it's branched out kind of by itself. So I've got no worries that this plant is going to branch out.
So what about bushy plants like Calathea? Where do you even begin with these?
Well, it's not as hard as you might think, and the aim of the game with these guys is to be heavy-handed.
Check out Zebby, my Calathea zebrina here. She's got a bunch of leaves that are either yellowing or turning crispy brown.
After my Calathea has had a bit of a rough winter in spring, I like to go in and get my clean pruners out and snip back and prune back this plant. So I'm a little bit late doing it because it is the beginning of summer. I've not had a chance to go through and do it. But one option you could do, and it's something I used to recommend on the channel, but I think I'm revising my thinking now. You could find a browning leaf, or a leaf with brown tips, and just cut off around the edge like so, just following the shape of the leaf, like so. So cutting off all the nastiness, and then you're left with a leaf that isn't so brown anymore. But to be honest, I feel like that is kind of papering over the cracks or stemming the tide, because there's clearly something wrong with this leaf. So really, the leaf is just going to go brown again in the next few weeks anyway. So it's much better to just cut off the entire leaf. Now a Calathea grows bulbs in the soil from which the leaves sprout through the soil. So what you want to do is go right to the base of the soil and just prune it off in its entirety. And that will reinvigorate the plant once you cut off some of the browning and yellowing leaves, and it will encourage it to send out new growth. And here she is. Zebby is looking much healthier now. So I've pruned off quite a few leaves. Any leaf that had any browning or yellowing whatsoever, I trimmed off. I wasn't shy about it whatsoever. And the great thing about this is not only are you tidying up the plant, so it looks like you know what you're doing with your plants, it's also kind of opening up the plant. So it's allowing air and light to get into the middle of the plant, and that should make these central leaves a bit healthier as well. If you're having lots of problems with your plants, like yellowing leaves, brown leaf tips and whatnot, then make sure you download my free Plant Problems Troubleshooting Handbook that you can get by following the link in the description or scanning this QR code here. It's got all the common problems, why they happen, and what to do about it. So it should get you out of a jam when something rears its ugly head. I've got a snake plant here that is looking a little bit worse for wear. So it lives over there, which is 3 meters from the nearest window, which is not a good place for a snake plant. If anything, they're like direct sun. You can see the evidence of why this plant is not happy, because it's got thin, long leaves like these, very thin at the base of the plant. And that means that the plant is stretching to reach for the light. So what you can do to get this plant in shape is cut out right at the base of the plant where it's coming out of the soil. Just cut off these narrow leaves like that. That will encourage the plant to send out new growth once you put it in a much brighter spot, which is what I'll do for this plant, maybe. You don't want to cut a snake plant leaf in half like that, because you'll be left with a leaf that won't do anything. It won't branch out or grow a new leaf or anything like that. So you want to cut it just below the soil line to kind of hide it, so it tidies up the appearance. So I'm going to go through and do that for all the thin leaves that I can see. And there you have it. So we've now got a plant that's got less leaves. I've cut off quite a few thin leaves there, as you can see, maybe about 12 or something. But we've got the thicker leaves left, which is probably from the original, when I originally bought the plant. So once I stick that in a brighter spot, new growth will come from the base, feeling a bit dry actually, so it needs a water as well. And it should thicken up nicely. Whenever you're pruning a plant, you do want to make sure that it's in pretty good nick. If you start pruning an unhealthy plant or a dry plant, then you're not going to get great results. This guy is nice and healthy, but he does need a bit of a prune back, and I'll show you why in a second. But I watered it 4 days ago, and that's important for pruning. You just want to make sure that it's a nice, well-watered plant. So peace lilies, they often get brown tips on the leaves, don't they? And this one's looking like a bit of a bushy fellow. So it's the perfect opportunity to go in, find your brown, yellowing leaves or whatever you've got, go near enough to the base of the plant and just cut them out. I've cut out 2 by accident there, but they've both got browning tips. And this is a good way of sending a signal to the peace lily that you're not happy with him and that you better hurry up and send out new leaves, otherwise you're going to stick him in the bin. And that's generally what they do, or what I find. When I give it a nice big prune back like this, I do find that new growth isn't far away. So I'm just going through and cutting back any leaves that are not to my standard in the Sheffield Mayplant's house. And there you have it. So I thinned it out nicely, which means that lots of air and light is going to get into the middle of this plant, and it's going to send out brand new leaves that are always much nicer and much healthier. So I have cut off quite a few leaves here. So I wasn't shy about how much I cut off, and that is the key to any pruning of the plants.
So when is the best time to prune?
Basically, you can do it any time of year, but it is best to do it in spring or summer, unless your plants continue to grow well in winter.
You won't kill a plant by pruning it in winter. It just means replacement growth will be slow and might not kick into gear until spring arrives.
I cut back the stem of this monstera in the depths of winter, last winter, right here, and it's grown a new stem successfully. So there's a new leaf there, and there's another new leaf on the way. So it does show that you can prune back in winter and you won't kill the plant.
Should the plant be a minimum size before we start lobbing its head off? Generally, no. It's actually a great idea to start pruning as early as you can.
If you wait too long and let the plant grow tall and lanky like me, then chances are the stems will be thin.
Pruning early generally thickens the main stem, which means it can better support top growth.
This little thing in here is a jade plant. It was a small jade plant that's a cut right back early on, so right down to near the base of the plant. And as you can see, there's a new growth point already emerging there. and there's one further down there, just at the bottom of the stem. So 2 new branches, and eventually they'll grow out, and this stem here at the base will be nice and thick, nice and girthy. So this Ficus elastica teneki is the perfect example of when you make a cut early on a plant, not only does it branch out into 2 new stems, but it also makes the stem nice and girthy. So I've done it again further up top for a video I did for the Chefies on Patreon. You can sign up to Patreon by following the link in the description, by the way. Bonus videos every week. But I cut it back on these 2 stems here at the top. So the theory being that it's going to branch out even further. So I did it 2 weeks ago, so I'm just waiting for 2 new growth points, hopefully, to activate on each of these stems. I'll get a nice big bushy Ficus elastica in a few months' time.
Now you might be worried about cutting too much off, and to that I say they will always grow back. That's the Sheffield May plant's mantra. Unless you cut a plant back so much that there's nothing left, you will be fine.
This fella here was my once big and beautiful Coleus. If you saw my plant ranking video, then you'll have seen me put this in S class because of how beautiful and big it was. I'll put a link in the top right for that video that you can watch. But an accident happened with this plant. It wasn't my fault, it was someone else's fault. There'll be a video coming out on the channel all about this in probably a few months when this is regrown. But an accident happened, so I had to cut it right back on all the stems, and it's now starting to shoot out new growth. There's a new stem here, a new stem there, basically all over this plant. New stems are emerging, so it's going to be a nice big bushy Coleus again, hopefully.
I've shown you lots of examples of pruning back plants with good old pruners, but most of the time you don't even need them.
So I have been cleaning my pruners in between cutting all the plants in this video, like a good boy, so they're all nice and clean. But you don't even need pruners to prune lots of your plants. So I've got a Tradescantia tricolour or quadricolour, whichever way you want to go with it. And this is a nice bushy plant, isn't it? So to get a Tradescantia nice and bushy, all you need to do is just pinch off the tips. And as with most plants, it should branch out from the point below where you pinched off the stem. So you can just go through where it's grown stems, just go through and pinch the tips off. Another tip for Tradescantia tricolour is when there is a stem like this that is all green, you want to cut those out because they will become dominant. After you've given your little babies the chop, what happens next? Basically, it's dead simple. You just continue to look after your plants as you normally would. So that means giving them a drink when the soil is dry. Don't water them when the soil is already wet. Continue to fertilise as you normally would. And then light. Light is the most important aspect to make sure that these new stems and new leaves arrive. If you haven't got new stems and new leaves after a few weeks or a couple of months or something like that, then it's normally because you haven't given them enough light.
I do have a warning to share with you about pruning plants with stems. Well, not so much a warning, but more of an advisory.
It's something that might bother you if you were to see it without warning, but it's nothing to be too concerned about.
Moni, my bedroom monstera, will perfectly illustrate this for us. I showed you the new leaf that emerged after I made the cut. Well, check out the fenestrations compared to the leaf that I cut off. Not as well developed, are they? This normally happens with plants like Monstera and Philodendron. The new leaf that emerges after the cut will be less mature than the one we cut off.
It's not a major issue, of course. The new stem will get back to the same maturity after it's pushed out a couple more leaves, but just expect this to happen when you next cut back your Monstera.
So what about flowering plants? In lots of cases, one of the best things you can do for these guys is cut off their flowers.
Sounds crazy, I know, but I explain everything in this video here, including why it's often better for their health, so make sure you check it out. I'll see you there.